Before we get into today's stories, never miss an update by signing up for the Dread Weekly newsletter on dreadsarmy.com. The link is in the description too. Get the latest encounters, trail camera footage, and news in your inbox once a week. Now, let's get to the story. My family used to go camping quite a lot. We owned a plot of land by a river about 40 minutes from where we lived, and it only took about an hour to get there. There weren't any buildings there, none of the privileges of modern society, but there was enough space for us to park our camper. We'd drive out, settle down, and get all the comforts of the RV with all the beauty of nature right outside our door. Maybe it wasn't real camping like building fires and sleeping under the stars, but it was close. It was enough for us. At least it kept us coming back every summer. We'd swim in the river, go fishing, and count all the different types of birds we could see. It was a good break from our day-to-day life, which was typically modern and hectic. That routine of ours stopped when I was in my late teens. And looking back during all the summers that we spent watching nature never really looked back at us. It never really encroached on the safety felt inside of our camper. But one night when I was 16, nature came knocking, literally knocking. We heard it far away at first, loud and sharp like someone swinging a baseball bat against a tree. We weren't quite asleep yet, not at that time. We didn't think much of it since it sounded so far away. We thought it was odd, laughed off the cold chill. It had sent creeping down our spines and moved on with our night. We thought we heard it again later, closer the second time, but it was so brief, and we were so tired by then that we convinced ourselves it was nothing. We thought we were being paranoid. I guess there's a kind of denial everyone experiences when they think they're in danger. Something couldn't happen out here, right? It couldn't happen to us. We've been coming here for years. We were wrong about all of that. The years we committed to visiting the riverside were about to come to an end. We just didn't know it yet. We woke up to the metal wall of the camper lurching. The sound of groaning heavy metal, bending and swaying against its will, shook us from our sleep. As we jumped to our feet, we realized one by one that the camper was shaking. Our area isn't prone to earthquakes, but we didn't know what else it could be. We dropped to the ground, took the best cover that we could, and waited for the shaking to pass. We were huddled together and gasping by the time it finally ended. You could tell that something was off. None of us really understood what was happening, but we thought it was over. We were relieved. We laughed, climbed off the floor, and decided to stay up a while longer. When we flicked on the interior lights, the knocking came back. This time, it was right outside our door. It was faster, louder. We were so startled that we dropped to the ground again. Before we could look around and ask each other what was happening, the thwacking noises outside ended with a roar. If you've ever been in a zoo and heard a lion roar from inside its enclosure, you know the sound? Deep and primal. This roar droned on and melted into a high-pitched cackle. The thing outside, whatever it was, laughed at us and then went quiet again. What were we supposed to do? We hadn't come out here prepared to face anything like this. We decided on the most logical thing. We were going to leave. That's exactly what we did. Or it's what we attempted to do. While my father tried to calm us down by explaining that we were all safe inside the RV, my mother jumped into the driver's seat. We were lucky. We had the option of driving right out of the lion's den. The engine turned and the headlights came on, and suddenly we saw it. It looked like a man was standing between the clearing where we parked our vehicle and the perimeter of trees that surrounded us. I could have climbed onto my dad's shoulders and the thing still would have been taller than us. It was the biggest living thing I'd ever seen. It was covered in hair. It was hard to make out its exact musculature because as the lights turned on, the beast was in motion. It roared again, more of a grunt this time, and hurled a massive stone with both of its hands straight for our windshield. It shattered the glass and crashed into the empty passenger seat. My mother was shrieking as she shifted the RV into reverse and began to pull out of the lot. The creature ran toward us, remaining upright on two legs while its long arms swung just above the ground. It was fast, too. It was closing in. My father tried to discourage the thing by throwing random item out through the hole where the windshield used to be. Our stew pot collided with its chest and slowed the creature down just enough. Our tires gripped the road and suddenly we were faster than that monster. We were able to put the campsite in our rear view and gradually the giant creature faded out of existence. None of us said much on drive home. We sold that piece of land. We never went camping again. And we only ever spoke of the creature a few years later after some of us had been drinking. It's a secret that my family has kept. We know if we shared too much with too many of the wrong people, our reputation would be ruined. None of us wants to be the laughingstock of our community. I'm sure you understand. That doesn't diminish the truth though. That doesn't change what we saw or what we survived. This isn't necessarily a warning or even a request. If you know what that thing was, I don't care to learn its name. I just thought I'd let you know. If you've seen something and you've kept it a secret, you're not alone out there. We all get it. Some things just have to be kept quiet. This happened on a hot and humid afternoon in July in 2018. I found myself wandering in the dense, lush swamplands of Louisiana near my home. My primary reason for being there was my recent move to Baton Rouge for work and the feeling that I wanted to familiarize myself with the intriguingly wild surroundings. Having been walking for hours, my ears had become accustomed to the buzzing insects and the diverse calls of unseen birds. However, as twilight began to set in, something caught my attention. The lively noises that had accompanied me throughout the day abruptly ceased, and silence fell over the swampland, so profound it made my skin crawl. Through the dim light filtering between the ancient moss-covered trees, I noticed something stirring. Too large to be a typical inhabitant of the swamp, a figure standing a startling 8 feet tall awkwardly moved in the distance. Its stance was eerily human, yet its movements were jarringly disjointed. I instinctively took cover behind a nearby tree, my pulse racing. Casting my eyes back towards the figure, I squinted, straining to discern more details in the fading light. It moved with a peculiar, stumbling gait, as if it were learning to use its legs. Each step it took seemed forced, unnatural, and the water around it rippled with a foreboding intensity, mirroring my escalating apprehension. Then, as a ray of the sinking sun found its way through the trees and illuminating the figure momentarily, my breath hitched. The creature's face bore an eerie resemblance to that of an alligator or a crocodile. Its scales were reflecting the sunlight with a dull sheen. But it was the eyes that truly terrified me. They were an intense yellow, burning like embers in the dying light. They held a predatory gaze. Silently, I watched as the creature waded through the murky swamp water, its eyes never leaving my hiding place. I could see it sway clumsily yet purposefully, its gaze never wavering, its massive frame cutting an imposing figure against the twilight. Its skin, I noticed, was a grim mosaic of dark, mud-caked scales, creating an eerie camouflage with the surrounding marshland. All rational thought had abandoned me, and it was replaced with a primal instinct of self-preservation. My palms were clammy, my breath shallow and ragged. Every instinct screamed at me to run, to escape, but I was frozen in my dread, my eyes locked with the creature's hypnotic gaze. Minutes passed, each ticking second stretching out into an agonizing eternity. Eventually, the creature turned, its piercing gaze breaking away from me. It moved deeper into the swamp, its monstrous silhouette slowly swallowed by the darkness. Only when it was completely out of sight did I dare to exhale, the tension draining from me in a rush. My lungs burned from the held breath, and my heart still pounded loudly, echoing the adrenaline that was slowly ebbing away. Sweat had formed a cold sheen on my skin, and my knees felt weak as if they would buckle. For several minutes, I remained hidden, huddled behind the rough bark of the tree, listening intently to the sounds of the swamp. The silence began to fill again with a natural night chorus, the chorus of frogs, insects, and nocturnal birds slowly resurfacing. It was as if the swamp itself had held its breath in the presence of the creature, and now, like me, it was releasing its anxiety in a symphony of sound. Gradually, I felt the paralysis of fear subside, replaced by a mix of bewilderment and exhilaration. I dared to peek from my hiding place, half expecting those haunting yellow eyes to pierce through the gloom. But there was nothing. I took a shaky step forward, my shoes squelching in the soft mud, and then another. The undergrowth beneath my feet was cold and damp. I needed to leave to escape this thicket that I now knew was this creature's home. Stumbling through the swamp, my sense of direction completely off, I finally found the narrow trail that had led me down here. Each crunching leaf and snapping twig beneath me seemed to echo my racing thoughts. My mind was a whirl of unanswered questions and disbelief. What was that creature? Where did it come from? Why hadn't it attacked? And perhaps, most disturbing of all, were there more of them? Emerging from the swamp, the sight of civilization never felt more comforting. I had escaped and, more importantly, survived. But for me, the encounter transformed the swamp from a place of nature into a reminder of an otherworldly terror. In the following days, I spent hours recounting my experience, first to local authorities, then to wildlife experts. Some believed, most doubted. I was told it was perhaps a hallucination due to exhaustion or a misidentified animal in the poor light. But deep down, I knew what I had seen and experienced was far from ordinary. Hi, Donovan. My name is Daryl, and I'm a psychology student at Temple University. I'm a big fan of your show and follow a lot of cryptid channels. I'm fascinated by how the human mind sees monsters in the shadows, but I've never been a big believer in the existence of legendary animals or the supernatural. However, this summer I had my own strange encounter that is making me rethink my past assumptions. I've gone over the encounter again and again in my head, and no amount of rationalization or psychological theories can explain the physical evidence I encountered. I want to tell myself that I didn't see anything supernatural, just a mundane animal that my adrenaline-fueled mind saw as demonic. However, I was not alone in this encounter, and the person with me described what I saw in perfect detail. I admit I was terrified by what I saw, but the scholar in me is persistent, and I made sure to have her write down what she saw before we spoke about it. I didn't want to risk talking about it first and taint each other's memories of the event. Sorry if I sound like a nerd, but this is why I listen to cryptozoology podcasts and YouTube channels in the first place, to understand human psychology. I guess I should give you some backstory. I was at a party 2 months back at a friend of a friend's house in West Philly. I met a cute girl from Drexel who was an engineering major, and we hit it off. It came out in the conversation that she was big into backpacking and wanted to hike the entire Appalachian Trail after she graduated. I grew up camping and being in the outdoors, so I offered to go backpacking with her sometime. Looking back, that was a little bit creepy, offering to take some girl you just met out in the woods all alone. But she was all for it, so we made plans to go the following weekend. I'm not from Philly, so I really didn't know the area, but I heard the New Jersey pine barrens weren't too far and that they were known for being a vast range of wilderness. A casual hike on a crowded trail didn't seem like enough. So we headed to South Jersey for what I hoped would be a cool experience in the Pine Barrens. It was awkward at first, just the two of us alone. There was no one else to chime in when the conversation lagged, but I thought it was still going well. We were about 3 miles into the hike when I noticed a strange smell. It was like someone had lit off fireworks in the area. There was a sulfurous haze hanging in the air. She wrinkled her nose up when she smelled it too. She walked past me to get away from the smell, but she jumped back with a yelp. She looked at me wide-eyed and nodded to the trail behind her. A torn-up deer carcass was in the path. I could see drag marks in sandy soil. It looked like something had purposely dropped the body there. I assumed we scared off whatever predator it was. Maybe a bear or coyotes. We walked another few miles and made camp. Our plan was to walk a different trail that looped back to where we parked in the morning. She brought a small tent. It was summer, so I didn't bother bringing my own. I just tied a tarp up over me in case it rained and set my sleeping bag down. I slept for a few hours, but something woke me up. My skin was prickling like I was in dry desert heat. The sulfur stench we smelled near the mutilated deer carcass was in the air again, but now it was stronger. My nose and throat felt irritated, like I was breathing in smoke. My eyes adjusted to the darkness, and I saw a shape at the edge of the clearing. The shape was large, at least 7 feet tall. It had a long horse-like head and a thin neck. I didn't see much of its body because I was distracted by intense red eyes. My hiking partner peeked her head out of her tent to ask me if I smelled the sulfur, but I couldn't answer. So she followed my gaze to the creature and gasped. It screeched and leapt into the air and spread bat-like wings. As it flew away, it smashed into a tree branch 20 feet up. It had to pause there to gather itself, and after a bit of fluttering of its wings, it finally flew off. I wanted to abandon all my things and start hiking back to the car right then and there, but I knew we wouldn't make it in the dark. I didn't sleep at all the rest of the night. At first light, we got to leave. On our way out, we saw the broken branch and the indent left in the soil where the creature took off. The sandy soil still showing the footprints where the creature stood. Thanks for listening to my crazy story. What is it about Alaska that's just so darn creepy? Maybe it's the miles and miles of barren wilderness. Maybe it's the complete desolation and thick, untamed woods. In this episode, we are going to explore a handful of tales brought to me by a girl who calls herself Crystal. Crystal has had a handful of strange and terrifying experiences up in Alaska. Crystal's story begins on Wrangell Island, where she lived in a neighborhood positioned across from an ocean beach. To the left lay a dense forest and a mountain loomed behind their neighborhood. Their home was the last one on the street, which placed them closest to the hills and woods and farthest from the other homes in the subdivision. The woods were lush, damp, and intimidating, yet also mossy, bountiful, and eerily beautiful. Just a year before they moved off, the island Crystal experienced an unforgettable Halloween at the young age of 5. By this time, she was well aware of the tradition of spooky costumes and roaming around the neighborhood. A slew of trick-or-treaters had made their rounds before the night drew to a close and the family retreated to bed. However, in the middle of the night, Crystal awoke to an eerie whispering and a palpable sense of being watched. She looked around her room, finding nothing out of the ordinary, until her gaze landed on her window. What she saw there was so horrifying that she covered her face and screamed. A towering figure was peering down at her through the top of her window. It had red eyes and a thick coat of dark brown, almost blackish fur. Its face was an unnerving hybrid of human and wolf-like features. When her mom rushed into the room, Crystal pointed out the window, but the creature had already disappeared. She tried to explain what she had seen, and the best description she could give was wolfman. Though she can't say with certainty what it was, she knows that it wasn't a person in a costume. Despite being so young, the memory has stayed with her throughout the years. While she never saw the creature again, she recently saw a video discussing the history of Bigfoot as well as werewolf sightings and other encounters. This made her confident that it was the creature she had seen peering down at her that unforgettable night. And now on to her second experience. This happened in the same place, but a year prior to the werewolf thing. She had been playing in the woods just to the left of the house. Her dad had cleared some brush there and hung a tire swing in a tree for her and her older brother. Her mother often watched them from the house window as they played. One day her brother was on the swing and she remembers herself being distracted by a tiger swallowtail butterfly that fluttered into the woods. She chased after the butterfly, eager to catch it, but instead ran into something blocking her. Something that she couldn't see but was very much there. Although it should have been terrifying for such a young child, she was more curious than scared. She stood there running her hands up and down and across this object, trying to figure out what it was and how to find a way past it. However, it was like touching solid air. There was a slight blur when she looked through it, but she couldn't figure it out at all. Confused, she went back to her brother and parents to tell them about her odd experience. With no plausible explanation, they dismissed it as a figment of her active imagination. Years later, she discovered that she had been heading towards a rocky cliff that was located in the same direction she was headed. She later wondered if some divine intervention had prevented her from coming across it and tumbling off the precipice. But she always wondered if it could have been something else. For example, it could have been an invisible force field or one of those glimmer men or an unseen entity from another realm. After all, her home was nestled in an area where many tales of uncanny incidents happened. Who really knows what she encountered that day in the woods? And finally, we come to her third experience. On the same island, in the same house, and roughly within the same year that she saw the strange wolfman creature Crystal experienced another unnerving event. It was the peak of summer in the early morning hours, and Crystal and her entire family were fast asleep. A noise or a voice woke her up, prompting her to try to get out of bed. However, she was unable to move. Despite her mind being awake and her brain functioning, her limbs wouldn't cooperate beyond an occasional twitch. She began crying out to her parents. They eventually walked into her room, but they looked strange and their words were unintelligible to her. Moreover, they didn't come to her aid. They just stood in the doorway looking in at her. Crystal couldn't move but tried to calm herself down and get back to sleep, thinking it was a nightmare. But sleep wouldn't come. After some time, she managed to drag herself out of bed, only to fall flat on the floor as her legs didn't work. Using her arms, she painstakingly pulled herself down the hallway to her parents' bedroom, where she found them awake. They were also unable to move. Meanwhile, her brother was shouting from the other side of the house, indicating that he too was unable to move. After about an hour, or perhaps more, everyone slowly regained control of their limbs. They spent the entire day trying to understand the inexplicable incident, but completely unable to comprehend what had occurred. They all described the feeling as though they had been stunned by something, like they had been shocked by a taser or something. Crystal's mother, who usually woke up before everyone else, mentioned that a ray of light had shot straight through the house for a split second before passing right over their bed. Crystal's mom and dad decided that calling the police would solve nothing and only serve to make them look insane. So, they spent the following weeks in a state of confusion, concern, and heightened vigilance, keeping their eyes out for anything strange and also barely sleeping. This bizarre incident never recurred, but it remains a topic of discussion within the family. Sometime after they eventually moved off the island, they learned about the government, allegedly conducting a variety of experiments there. Crystal's family couldn't help but wonder if they had unwittingly become the unfortunate victims of such experiments. What do you all think about Crystal's strange encounters? On the crisp evening of November 4th, 2015, a simple man named Benjamin found his life taking a turn from the ordinary to the extraordinary. Prior to this transformative event, his life was marked by the peaceful monotony of living in solitude, surrounded by the picturesque wilderness of the Pacific Northwest. Benjamin was a humble man, appreciating the quiet simplicity his life offered, free from the hustle and bustle of modern urban living. He spent his days tending to his cabin and hunting for food, content with the steady rhythm of life that the forest provided. He felt a sense of belonging among the trees and the multitude of creatures that called the forest home. His existence, however, was to be significantly altered by an encounter that would be as mystifying as it was terrifying. That fateful evening began like any other, with the sun setting behind the towering peaks and the forest cloaked in twilight. But as the cool winds of November began to sweep across the land and the moon began to rise, an extraordinary story unfolded. Huge pine trees that had been there for over 100 years surrounded the small cabin. Their green needles were like a thick blanket, making the cabin seem like a tiny spot in a giant wild painting, The area around the cabin was crisscrossed by small streams that chuckled and babbled as they flowed, and colorful wildflowers popped up here and there, adding spots of color to the mostly green landscape. One chilly evening, as Benjamin was walking back home from a day of hunting, something strange happened. He noticed a smell that wasn't normal. The forest usually smelled fresh and earthy, like damp leaves and pine trees. But this smell definitely wasn't good. The smell was strong and made Benjamin's nose wrinkle in disgust. It reminded him of a stinky bathroom mixed with the smell of a skunk and a musty smell that he couldn't quite put a name to. It was a smell that made his stomach churn and made him want to cover his nose. Then he heard a sound that made him freeze in his tracks. It was a growl so loud that made his heart beat fast in his chest. But it wasn't just a growl. After the growl, there was a series of strange, high-pitched whooping sounds that echoed through the trees. Benjamin had never heard anything like it before. He was scared, but he also wanted to know what was making that sound and that awful smell. His heart pounded as he slowly turned his head, trying to see what was there in the darkness. As Benjamin was trying to locate the source of the sounds and the overpowering stench, the surrounding darkness began to move in a way that was not natural. Something was coming towards him. From the shadows, a colossal figure emerged, its height surpassing the average human by a clear margin. This entity stood at what he guessed to be 9 feet tall. This hulking creature was exceptionally built, with broad shoulders that showcased a powerful physique. Its chest was massive. It was draped in a coat of thick hair that ranged in color from brown to dark brown, with patches of reddish hues. It gave the creature a camouflage look, perfect for lurking unseen in the forest shadows. But what stood out the most was its face. Unlike the rest of its body, the creature's face was devoid of hair, revealing a strange, ape-like resemblance. Its head was oddly shaped, jutting upwards in a point. The beast's eyes were small and beady, shining with an intimidating black glow. Even stranger was the fact that the creature seemed to have no neck. It was as if its head was an extension of its torso, further adding to its intimidating appearance. Benjamin got himself under control and sprinted back to his cabin, where his hands barely remembered how to function as he locked the doors and peered anxiously out the window. The creature seemed to have disappeared. He could find no signs of it, at least no visual signs. The smell was still lingering, which convinced him that the encounter actually happened. Eventually, the story got out and people in the surrounding areas began to hear about Benjamin's story. Some believed him, but others thought he had always been a bit strange. And to them, this was just icing on the cake. Even now, years after that fateful encounter, the story continues to mystify and intrigue the inhabitants of the Pacific Northwest. The truth of the encounter may never be fully known, but the tale remains a testament to the mysteries hidden within the depths of the Pacific Northwest.